So good morning. Today is the 23rd of Shvat and the 14th of February. And we're going to try to wrap up this mimer, this essay from the Rebbe Rashab. We're in chapter 4, Ot Dalet, on page 76. והנה כמו שיתרון לנפש הקידום מן החוסן לנפש הבאמת דווקא, כמו כן יובן מה שכתוב שיש יתרון לחוכמה, רוצה לומר לחוכמה העליונה מן השכלות דווקא. It's closer to each other.
I can only see it if I sit.
Yeah. So we talked yesterday about the fact that now he's going from psychology to the epistemology, and those were scary words, but it's from the inner being of ourselves and our avodas Hashem to the more general question of knowledge that comes from above to knowledge that comes from below. And we talked about this being the difference of knowledge that comes from experience and knowledge that comes from revelation, from God. And he said that the same principle holds, that the wisdom that comes from above is like the divine soul, and it is augmented and strengthened by the wisdom that comes from below. That the yitron, the advantage that it has, is not just an advantage, but also an augmentation. That the wisdom from above is augmented by the wisdom from below. V'ainyan, so we're on page 77 actually, second line. V'ainyan, second, right? D'inei ktiv, al yitalel hachacham b'chochmato, ki im bazot yitalel. There's a pasuk that reads, the wise, from Proverbs, no, it's not from Proverbs, it's from Isaiah or Jeremiah, I don't remember. The wise man should not exalt himself because of his wisdom, but rather he should exalt himself by his knowledge of me, by his spending time trying to know God. And this is talking about the wisdom of the Torah. כמו שכתוב בזוהר חלק ב' דף קנ"ח עמוד ב' נביא צבח ואמר למראי תורה דחכימין באורייתא כה אמר השם אל יתהלל החכם בחוכמתו. So he says, the Zohar explains this, that this verse, you should not be exalting yourself about your wisdom, is talking about those who know Torah. So it's talking about the revealed wisdom. You shouldn't exalt yourself, you shouldn't aggrandize yourself because of the revealed wisdom that you have. Ki'im bazoar. Here it says, probably to correct this, Ki'im bazot, but rather by this, by wanting to know God. But we have to understand, what does the Zohar mean? Why is he addressing this? Why is he saying the prophet, that's why I thought it's Isaiah or Jeremiah, why is the prophet addressing those who know Torah? You would think that he's addressing those who have mundane knowledge, they have mundane wisdom. Why does the Zohar change this? והלא בחינת חוכמת התורה הוא בחינה גבוה מאוד, שהוא בחינת חוכמה עילה עד האצילות, החכים ולא חוכמה ידיעה. ואיך אמר על זה, על יתהלל החכם? Why would he say about this? You shouldn't aggrandize yourself because of the wisdom, the revealed wisdom that you have from above. אך העניין, להנה בחוכמה יש שתי מדרגות. But really, the issue is like this, that wisdom has two levels to it. עצם החוכמה, the substance of the wisdom. השני, כוח התפשטותה למטה לברר בירורים. And then there's the power of the wisdom to come down into the world and refine it. Right? In the wisdom of the Torah, we have like two different levels. We have the level that is the wisdom in and of itself. It's like a person is just is learning Torah for the sake of learning Torah. And then there's also learning Torah for the sake of refining the world, of changing the world. It's how it's applied, the applied wisdom. וכמו הדרך משל, ישהו חכם לעצמו שמבין את ההשכלה בטוב, וכן לא יכול להסבירו לזולתו, רק שמבין לעצמו השכל היטב. ויש שיכול להסביר את השכל לזולתו גם כן. It says an example of this is a person who understands a topic very well for himself, but he couldn't explain it to someone else. Right, so because you like applied wisdom, but there is such wisdom that the person understands, but it's like the beginning of the understanding, you would say, and then he hasn't been able to explain it yet to anyone.
Even to himself?
No, to himself he does. He understands it. But in order to explain it to other people, he has to find how to enclose it how to engarb it within parables, speech. Some metaphors, speech that can be understood. And that's always not so easy. Right? A lot of mathematics, like for instance, wasn't really formalized until it was formalized. Meaning, people understood it in their minds, the mathematicians understood, but until they built a notation that anyone can understand this, then a lot of people didn't, how do you express, how do you transfer the knowledge from one person to another? You have to find a language, right? So if you're just speaking, that's easy. But if it's like mathematics, you have to find a mathematical language. It's like you have to find a parable in a certain sense, a language that can contain those thoughts. It's not so easy. ובאמת זהו מפני ששכלו גדול יותר מן הראשון. והיינו ששכלו חזק ורחב. הוא מבין כל דבר חוכמה לעמקותו ואמיתתו, ולכן יכול להשפיע גם לזולתו. So he says here, really, the person who can also explain it is because his mind is stronger. It doesn't mean that the other guy doesn't understand it. But in order to be able to transfer it to someone else, he has to have a lot more seichel. He has to have a lot more, call it, power of thought. מה שאין כן, מי שאין לו שכל חזק, אינו מקבל את השכל בהרחבה לאמיתתו, כי אם בצמצום ודי רק להפקיע את עצמו ולא יכול להשפיע לזולתו. I think it should be להשפיע את עצמו, I don't know exactly, but it means that the person who can only think it for himself, his mind is more contracted, his understanding is more contracted. וזהו שנשתבח שלמה וידבר שלמה 3,000 משל. And that's why King Solomon expressed his, he exalted himself, he wrote about himself, that he spoke 3,000 metaphors, or 3,000 parables. שהיה יכול להסביר את חוכמתו למטה ב3,000 משלים, because he was able, these parables were what he used in order to express it below, so that regular people could understand what he wanted. כמובן במקום אחר. וזהו אל יתעלל חכם בעצם החוכמה, כמו שהיא למעלה, כי אם בזאת יתעלל היינו להמשיך בחינת תורה למטה, לברר ברורים עד סוף רגלי העשייה ושמרי האופנים, הדרגות היותר תחתונות שבחוכמה יתברירו. So here he says very clearly that the person who only has the theoretical wisdom should not exalt, should not aggrandize himself. Only he who knows how to apply it. And only when you know how to apply is it something that is worthy of being praised. So what is this all talking about? So we have these two levels of wisdom, the substance of the wisdom, and then the application of the wisdom, and when it comes down. So we know, the Alter Rebbe talked about this verse many times, the wisdoms will have glee outside, they'll be of joy outside. ופרש בזוהר, חוכמות רין, חוכמה עילה וחוכמה תותה. And as Alter Rebbe has many maimarim about this, from Koheles, from Ecclesiastes, that this refers to two types of wisdom, the supernal wisdom and the lower wisdom. חוכמה עילה ובחינת חוכמה דאצילות, החכים ולא חוכמה ידיעה. ובחינת חוכמה תודה הוא מה שאמרו הזן, נובלות חוכמה של למעלה תורה, שבחינת אור בשם, בחינת החוכמה נמשך למטה כדי לברר בירורים, והיינו בחינת תורה שחוכמה תורה נתלבשה בדברים גשמיים כאשר פסול. So here he says the higher wisdom, we usually say the higher wisdom is Torah. The lower wisdom is the mundane knowledge. And he says no, this is all true within Torah itself. The higher wisdom is the theoretical aspects of Torah, and the lower wisdom is how Torah became halacha. And then you suddenly have the application of Torah into kasher and pasul, into things that are permitted, things that are not permitted, things that are viable, things that are not viable, things that are rectified, things that are not. So all this is to refine reality, because that's how you transform it into mitzvot. Today it's very clear what this is. I mean, there's a lot of people who are very good at understanding Torah philosophically, but they don't keep mitzvot, so they don't see how the higher wisdom becomes something applied. They don't see the connection. They don't see why is this connected.
It's the sod of Naaseh v'Nishma.
Right. That the sod there is that eventually there is a thought. There is nishma in the end. It's true that you first have to do. You have to see how it's applied. Usually the way this is called gadlut rishon and gadlut sheni. And first type of high-mindedness and the second type of high-mindedness. The first type of high-mindedness, usually the way it's explained is, if someone goes to medical school and they learn anatomy, and so they know a lot about the human body, but then when they actually go into surgical residency, it's a completely different story. like everything you learned in an anatomy that was very good, but it's not applied. And you have to actually relearn everything a second time. So, as a usual mashal that's used in Chasidut, that I learned the theory, and I may know it, and I was tested on it, and I got 100 on the test. I know all the Latin terms, I know everything, I know where everything is. I can recognize, on the cadaver, I can recognize everything. But the cadaver is like in vitro. And then you get a living person in vivo. I know it's not what it means, but it's like suddenly you get the living person, and it's completely different. Because you don't have to clamp anything, you don't have blood, and you're not fishing your way around an actual person where everything is very dynamic. So it changes completely the moment that you have applied wisdom. It's one of the mashals that are given. It's called Gadlut Rishon and Gadlut Sheni. V'chen b'maaseh mitzvot. And likewise, when we talk about the mitzvos, Harei nitlabsha chokma dvarim gashmim, the Torah talks about Gedilim ta'aseh lecha. I just learned yesterday. I didn't know this. The Torah doesn't say you cannot wear a garment that has 4 corners without tzitzis. The Torah says you shall make gdilim on the 4 corners of your... What's the difference? So of course there's a lavani takalas, like there's because it's you need to have gdilim, so you can't, as a corollary, you can't walk around with a garment of 4 corners that doesn't have tzitzis. But it still doesn't say it. So what happens, for instance, if you go into shul on Shabbos, you don't have a talus because there's no Eruv or whatever, I don't know what, you don't have a talus, and you want to use one of the shul's talisim.
You don't have to check it.
And so you don't have to check it. Why? Because even if it's not kosher, and you would say, but you can't wear it because you're wearing a 4-corner garment that doesn't. No, that's a different reason. Listen to this. Here he says, this is from the Mordechai. He writes that because it says Gdilim ta'aseh lecha, and you can't tie a knot on Shabbos, so the prohibition is much, much weaker on Shabbos than it is on a regular weekday. So on a regular weekday, he says, again, not every the Shulchan Aruch doesn't paskin this way, but halacha lemaaseh, they take that into consideration, and they say if you're going to be the only one without a talus and you'd be embarrassed, you can put the talus even if you know you did check, and you know that it's not kosher.
So it's not like a 4-corner garment that simply doesn't have any
right.
tzitzit.
It is, but you're still allowed to wear it because you can't fix it on Shabbos. And because the commandment was Gdilim ta'aseh lecha, you should make the tzitzis on the garment, and you can't do that on Shabbos. So apparently, if you can't be fixed, then you can wear it. Then it's much easier. Why? Because there's that kvod habriot, doche aseh d'oraita, that you shouldn't be embarrassed in public.
Wow!
I heard this from Rabbi Yaakov Yosef yesterday, walking back home. It's very. It's a ganze chap, like a really, like very, very shiny chap. Anyway, he had other reasons to say that it was permissible to wear it. Anyway, not even if you did check it, even if you already know that it's not kosher. Anyway, so that's already applied knowledge, and that's like you wouldn't think about this if you weren't thinking about the situation. Like dilim ta'aseh lecha. You understand that there's a difference between that, but you wouldn't think about this particular situation in which a person came into shul, he doesn't have talus, and now he has this problem that everyone else has and he doesn't have. That will only come out of reality. And that forces you to bring out of the Torah like another consideration that you wouldn't have thought of. Even though, we usually say that the Mordechai, he's a parish on the Gemara. We don't say that he's like a posek. But he's considered a posek. Anyway, so he says, Lemala ataliti b'chinat prisa de malka asher b'chinat hamakif v'tzitzitem lamed bet netivot chokhmah. So above, in the theoretical knowledge of the Torah, what does the talus represent? It represents the parsa, prisa de malka. It's like a parsa. It's a. I don't know if prisa de malka means the same thing, but at least what I know about it is that it's the not garment, but like the in the Mishkan, the parochet. How do you say parochet? The curtain. It's like a curtain between the worlds. Shubchinat makif, which is a makif, which is a surrounding light, and the tzitzis themselves, the woolen tzitzis, that because there's 32 of them, they're the 32 pathways of wisdom. So they all have a higher representation, which is what usually the inner dimension of Torah talks about. And the same way, all the other mitzvos have also this understanding. But when it comes down into our world, then it becomes lower wisdom, because its purpose is to refine. And how does it refine? When it becomes a garment that an actual person wears. וזהו חוכמות בחוץ, על ידי שנתלבשה בחינת חוכמה עילה בחוכמת התא, ונתלבשו בחוץ שהם דברים גשמיים, על ידי זה תרונה, שיהיה על ידי זה יתרון האור, בחינת החוכמה, שהעיר ויתגלה מבחינה של למעלה מהחוכמה, בחינת חוכמה. תתא, I think that's what he wants to say. So, and what does it mean that the wisdoms will sing when they're on the outside, when the higher wisdom, the supernal wisdom, encloses itself within the lower wisdom, and they become a power that can refine the external world. And that's why it says that at nighttime his song is with me, because song represents pleasure that is above wisdom, meaning it's a pleasure in the crown. And that's what it means, that wisdom comes out of the nothingness. Which nothingness? The crown. The crown, as far as the super consciousness, as far as we're concerned, is something that we don't grasp. So the wisdom itself is coming out of the feeling of pleasure. And it's only a nothingness that's like only a glimmer. So even though, and this is like a second thing, it's more than even the first one that he said, the higher wisdom in the lower wisdom. Here he's saying even the source of the wisdom, the pleasure, is now enclosed within the wisdoms that come down into the world. That's also, he says, that's also chokhmot bachutz tarona, so that causes even more joy. So we have two things here. Supernal wisdom, the theoretical wisdom enclosing within the applicable, the applied wisdom, and also the source of the higher wisdom, which is pleasure itself. What pleasure is there in the what is this pleasure that's above wisdom? Simply put, that's what a person feels when he learns. He feels he feels, where does this pleasure come from? This great joy that he has when he learns. I don't know if anybody has such a thing. That when they learn, they have tremendous pleasure just in the learning itself.
And unlike physical pleasure, it's Ein Sofi.
Right. And you also you don't see where it comes from. It just appears out of nowhere. It's mamash, and it drives you. So all these are examples of what it means that the wisdoms will sing when they're on the outside, when they're applied. V'zeu shiro imi, shiro is written, he says, without a yud. So it's shiro shelo. So shiro means his song. שירו הוא שיר של הקדוש ברוך הוא, כמו שכתוב, ויעץ לו שעשועים, שבבחינה מקור תענוגים, שעשועים העצמיים. So when you're learning Torah at these levels, that you're taking the higher and applying it and bringing it down, what comes out is God's song itself, meaning it's not just your pleasure. What you're feeling, the pleasure that you feel it comes out of nowhere, is really the pleasure that God gets from the learning. That's what you're feeling. That's why it's so infinite. It's God's song. It's not even yours. ונמשך בבחינת חוכמה ונקרא שירו בהי דחוכמה נקראת ראשית לשון נוקבה שמקבל מבחינת ראש. And so it's called the song with the feminine form. That's how we read it. We read it as if that's how it's written. It's written as shiro, and we read it instead of shira, instead of saying that it's just song, we say it's his song. וכשמאיר מבחינת התענוג בחוכמה הוא בחינת שירוי מבחינת תרונה. Okay, so this is all that when the application happens. וכל זה נמשך על ידי התלבשות החוכמה בבחינת חוץ. And this only happens when the wisdom comes all the way down and is applied into the physical world. וזהו ולילה שירו עמי, שעל ידי בחינת לילה ובחינת חושך, והם דברים הגשמיים שהם בחינת חושך, וגם השכל השני נקרא חושך וסכלות לגבי חוכמת תורה. This all happens at night time. ובלילה שירו עמי. And the night here represents the mundane physical world which is not illuminated, which is far from God. These are the physical material substances that are dark in and of themselves until they're lit by Torah, until you have some. And this also represents, he says, the mundane human mind, which also is darkness. Why is it darkness? Because it has no knowledge of God. It's only like, I just learned math. There's no godliness in the math. I just learned chemistry. There's no godliness there. Psychology in and of itself, certainly there's no godliness. So it's dark in that sense. And it's only illuminated when the Torah comes into it, when the wisdom from the Torah now illuminates it. But he says that's where it needs to go. So you either apply it down to physical objects, and you say, this table, you can't make it out of, I don't know, you can make it out of anything you want. But this food that you're eating now, you didn't take meiser from it, you refined the physical objects, or that you refined the mundane knowledge. So that's the Torah has to come down into the mundane knowledge. וזהו וראיתי אני שיש יתרון החוכמה מן הסכלות כי יתרון האור מן החושך כמו שנדבר לעיל יתרון האור והנפש האלוקי נמשך מבירור הנפש הבהמית שהוא השמן הנמשך אחריו בטילה. And that's what it means. So this is a reversed order. That only, he explained actually in this mimer two ways of influence. It's either we have to start with the Torah influencing the mundane wisdom, but then once it influences it and it shows it a higher way of thinking, which reveals godliness also, it doesn't just leave it as, again, like secular wisdom, but it elevates it and says all the secular wisdom can reveal godliness also. So then it's drawn after it. All the secular wisdom says, okay, I understand that this is a higher way of thinking. And you have to see examples of this to actually see it that it works. That you have to see when secular wisdom changes, and it changes to incorporate some godly idea, that's when something happens. So I always say that the easiest place to see this is the whole scientific revolution. The whole scientific revolution was because they gave up on Aristotle. We talked about that in the first classes. That Aristotle thought the world was eternal. That was his only explanation for causality all the way back. And what we said here is that when you introduce the idea of something from nothing, everything jumps higher. And we said that in the terms of history, of science, that was the scientific revolution of the 17th century. That they began to accept the Platonian notion, but it wasn't really Plato just by himself. And we said that, at least in our history books, it's always clear that Plato learned from Jeremiah. That was always accepted. Even if it never happened, that was the way that they read it. That he was influenced by religion. Aristotle wasn't. And Plato was. And so we know that the whole way of treating mathematics, everything changed when they didn't know Plato in the Middle Ages. Because he was gone. It wasn't retained, that knowledge. It was rediscovered slowly at the end of the Middle Ages. They rediscovered so for them that was what it was. But really, if you really trace it back, you'll see that in the end this all came from people who were learning Torah in some way. The whole scientific, this is a thesis that hasn't been researched so much, but the Christian interest in Torah began to open up the thought that maybe the world is created. It's not like the Greeks said, because they held this in like it was a very big contradiction. They didn't know what to do with it, because the Greeks say the world's eternal, and Torah says, and they all learned the Torah, and it says the world was created. They didn't know what to do. When they accepted the possibility that it's created, suddenly whole new ways of thinking about the world changed. And that's how they came to the Big Bang. That's how they came also to particles being created, something out of nothing. Today, that's the way we look at it. The particles are just created. We don't know how they're created. They just come out of nowhere. So it says all this is how the Torah affects the mundane knowledge. And once it affects it this way, it itself is augmented also. The Torah itself is augmented also. And he just repeats the mashal of the candle and the oil. And on the contrary, he says, Adraba rei nasa yesh v'davar ma, that not only does the oil not lose itself. You would think that maybe if you added Torah into the mix, the mundane wisdom would die. It wouldn't flourish. He says, on the contrary, not only is it not done away with, it doesn't disappear, but it becomes light. He said it turns so that when you now learn chemistry, it augments your love of God, which is what basically Maimonides says in the beginning, that if you look at nature and you understand it properly, it causes you to love Hashem. ועושה יש ודבר משכלו, וזהו כל האומר אין לי על התורה שאינו בטל, אף תורה אין לו, כי אם לימוד התורה צריך להיות בביטול, כמו אמר המגיד, אני המשנה מדבר פיך, ולדי זה ממשיך היתרון בבחינת חוכמה. But it's very important that all the time when he learns the Torah has to be a sense of nothingness, of something from nothingness. And that's not just epistemological, it's also psychological. He has to feel all the time that what he's revealing is something that's coming from above. So how come I have another page here? I thought we were finished. We're not. We have a whole nother page.
Okay.
What?
You ever wanted to carry on learning the mind?
I guess. I thought we were finished with this. I didn't remember the whole next page. Okay.
Couple more chances.
So we'll finish it tomorrow. I thought we were finished. I didn't remember the last chapter.